Welcome to the New Abbey YouTube channel. We are a Jesus community telling the biggest story of God in Los Angeles, and we're excited that you're joining the conversation with us today. Enjoy.
For the ways that you valued it as well. In the very same breath, we always say, if you need help and you need support, you can email info@newabbey.org. We've received a ton of requests in the last couple of weeks. Makes sense. It's the holidays. We want to find ways where we can support you. And one of the ways that we want to support you not only financially, but also just how you grow in understanding what money is and how it works for you. We have a financial literacy class. We've done it 4 times now. We have another one that's coming up in January, some more information about that. But if you're just like, man, I don't even know where to start with money, but I would love to even figure out a way to one day be able to give money, great, that's a great class to start. But more importantly, just a tool for your life so that you can understand a little bit more financial literacy. With that, though, what a segue going from financial literacy to Scott the Painter. Is that like I'm like a great hype team. Yeah, you're welcome for that. Scott the Painter is here. Scott, come on. That's not your real name. Your real name's Scott Erickson, but if your Instagram is something, that's the way that it works. Oh, I was going to hand out free books like Oprah. Anybody? Yeah. Anybody want a book? Oh, catch it, I guess. There you go. Who else? This is... Oh, God, I feel like this is going to go wrong. Yeah, anybody else? There we go. This is so over the top. Great.
For people who aren't even
Yeah, great. That was nice. That was good. The reality is I actually have 16 more free books in the back, so the first 16 people to go grab them.
There we go.
Merry Christmas. Scott's a great friend of New Abbey, myself, love him. We hung out in tuxedos last night because that's what 2 grown dads do on a Saturday night with one another. And
that picture's on both our Instagram feeds if you want to see it. It's pretty fantastic. Yeah.
And it looks like we're wild, but we're in bed by 10 p.m.
We definitely left the party early.
Yeah. So because
what was our check?
If either one of us were tired, our safe word was Diplodocus.
No, the question, it was just somewhere in the conversation would be like, when you grew up, did you say Diplodocus or Diplodocus?
Yeah, so.
And that was a cue
that's
that
how we knew that we were both tired and old dads and had to go home.
And people were like, who says Diplodocus? And I was like, my mom. All right, she was a nurse and she didn't know how to pronounce dinosaur names.
And then I heard it, and then I knew we were leaving. And this has nothing to do for the advancement of your faith.
No, it
doesn't. With that, Scott's amazing. He can introduce himself. He's a curator, author, amazing guy. Yeah, you got it.
Okay, great, thanks. Thank you. Great to be with you all. Thanks. Yeah, what a room. What a room. That good news, that was amazing. What a room that's going on here. I hear you all do usually a question to discuss, and so I want to do something maybe a little different, which is less words and more images. So let's go to the next slide. So on this next slide, we have a series of drawings here that are of a Pinto, which is one of the most holiest of vehicles. And my question to you that you will discuss with somebody around you is, which one do you relate to this morning? All right, so that is your question to discuss, and we're going to do that for the next 5 minutes. Go. Okay. Come back to us. Come back to us. Are there like a few people that just want to like share? You don't have, not a deep share. It's not an open mic, but like, is there anybody who wants to like say, oh, this car was me, this version was me? Anybody? Just yell it out. How many related to the middle one? Kind of taking some risks, a little adventurous, awesome. What about, I heard somebody talk about the flat tire in the bottom right. Any flat tires? Feeling flat tires? Yeah, woohoo, all right. We mentioned moving 3,000 miles. Anybody in the midst of feeling like they were moving, kind of changing spots, things like that? What about fireworks? I was talking to Jess, she felt fireworks. Yeah, we got some fireworks. What about this like all locked up or like stuck, can't get out? Yeah, and it wasn't your fault. Somebody just came along and like did something. I make my living as a visual artist and a communicator. I think a lot about the images that are associated with the words that we use. And why I like this exercise is because what's happening to us is what's going on when we look at something and it reflects something in us is it's becoming an excavating tool. Now, art has a lot of functions through storytelling and stuff, but one of the things that I love about art a lot is that how much of it can become an excavating tool. For example, I like this example. You ever turn on the radio and then a song comes on and you're like, ho, this is my song. And you turn it up and you start singing along. What's happening in that moment? What's happening in that moment is somehow the artist lyrically and sonically is perfectly describing what it feels like to be in your own skin, to be in your life. And that becomes a bit of like a vehicle to honesty, a vehicle to God, a vehicle really to yourself. And it becomes like a prayer in some ways. It becomes like a way to have a conversation with the universe we find ourselves in. And often the conversation that we're finding ourselves in can be celebratory, it can be good things, but can also be hard things. And all of that is very intimate. And let's go to the next slide. And I think it becomes very vulnerable. This season of Advent, New Abbey, and talking with Corey and Britt and stuff, you guys are using some images I made that started as Instagram posts and then became a book, this book called Honest Advent. And I'm not a woman, but I'm married to one. And I've witnessed 3 pregnancies and 3 births, really up close. And pregnancy and birth, incarnation is a beautiful and sacred and wonderful thing to experience, but it's also risky and painful, and there's a lot of bodily fluids. And I remember like at a certain season in the midst of our 3rd pregnancy, like Christmas came around, and it was 2016, it was after a very divisive and long presidential election. We had like this crisis in Syria, refugees, the Zika virus, Flint water crisis, so many crises since then. But I remember like all of a sudden walking into like a Walgreens and being like, oh yeah, it's Christmas time. And it felt like the brand of Christmas, the narrative of Christmas had nothing to do with the world that I lived in. And I love Christmas, I really do, but I was like, does the celebration of Christ coming in the world mean anything to our world now? Not as like pitching a product or please join our cult, but just really like, why are we celebrating this? Because is it supposed to do something to us? And when I turned to my wife, somebody just asked me recently, they're like, what were you reading that made you write this book? And I was like, I wasn't reading anything. I was watching my wife's biology. Like when I saw my wife embodied in this process of bringing forth another life, I saw that there was this risk, this vulnerability there, and I thought maybe the way that we experience Christ in our midst is the same way that Christ came into the midst of the world, which was through human vulnerability. And maybe we could use this as a lens to see how it's not just a story back then, but it's a story that's happening right now. So throughout this Advent season, you're going to be using some aspects of vulnerability and talking about it. And this morning, I wanted to talk about the aspect of love. So because I'm a visual artist and I used to be a high school art teacher, we're just going to have like a little art class. I'm going to show you like 3 images, and we're just going to spend some time expounding on them and seeing what comes up. So the first one is this image that we have printed out here. It's in the chapter scene. I remember my friend Taylor, we were spending an overnight camping trip together, and one night he said to me, he had gone on a long walk and he came back, and he had this look on his face, and he just said to me, he said, I don't want God to love me. I just want God to tell me what to do. Because if I let God love me, God would love me for who I am right now. And I don't want to look at who I am right now. So I'd rather just have God tell me what to do. And then he walked out the door. And I didn't see him for a couple hours. I was writing. I was like, what just happened? My friend Taylor was alluding to there's multiple ways, but let's just say there's kind of two ways to approach a spiritual journey. One way is to believe and to practice that love is something that you have to earn, right? And none of us would consciously be like, well, that's ridiculous. You don't earn love. But we all can kind of get into that mode. We know this by, the framework is you're supposed to do this, and you're definitely not supposed to do this. And mostly we just talk about the stuff you're not supposed to do, right? And we've all maybe been in this kind of type of religion or spiritual practice, right? Here are the things we don't do. Here are the things we do. Well, what if I do the don't? Well, then it's going to be so disappointing, right? And it becomes this janky treadmill of trying to earn love but never feeling like you're getting anywhere. And then there's this other, does this happen a lot? Okay. There's this other, I'm usually just sue, 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 so maybe we'll get down on the floor. But there's this other way of a spiritual journey which understands and practices that love is not something that we earn, but something that we receive. That in fact, that it's not something that it's acquired by application and accomplishment, but it's something that maybe we unearth, or maybe something we allow ourselves to have happen to us, and there's a way of receiving that. So if we look at this image right here, that's up here, this one's about, it's tied into this other passage about the root of Jesse and all this stuff here, but we see these cosmic hands, right? And we see this tree that's coming out of the ground, and it's rooted in the fabric of this benevolence or this creator, this thing like that. Now, what I love about this image is that we can see that the path, and we all know because we've all witnessed trees, that trees, it's a process of growing. And so that, in fact, coming into the world, anything that comes into the world is in a process of growing and changing and transforming, and has different stages. And there's grace for all of those stages, from the sapling to the tree that has leaves that gives shade in the summertime. Another thing about this image that I think is really fun, though, is that a tree, the goal of the tree is to be a tree. Like a tree is not being asked to be a hamster or a salamander or a piece of coral, right? A tree, its incarnating in the world is to become a tree. I think what's very fascinating about, where am I? I got a lot of things going on. I think what's really interesting about being a human being is that we are one of the only species on the planet that can actually try to choose to not be who we really are. We're really good at trying to say, this isn't who I am, I want to be somebody else. Faking, I want to put on a mask, I want to represent myself in a different way. Go to any lobbyist convention in DC and you'll see something like that. But there's also this arc of a human life where the universe somehow strong arms you into a place and you go oh, fine, yeah, this is who I really am. I see it and I hate it, right? Go to any AA meeting and you'll hear that conversation. There's this moment that we come to terms with who we are, and we really have to be seen. Why is it so hard to be seen, to be really looked at? Why don't we want love to really love us how we are right now? I'm not a therapist, but I go to therapy. But I think there's some things which is, here's a couple things. One is, when we allow ourselves to be seen, we're going to see a spectrum of who we are. We're going to see our strengths and we're going to see our weaknesses. We're going to see our superpowers and our kryptonite. We're going to see our light side and our dark side. And what happens when we begin to see that spectrum is that the guard comes down, and then we can actually be touched. We can actually be embraced and touched. And not necessarily, and we've probably had this experience, it's not always positive, because we can be loved, but we can be rejected. We can be embraced, but we can be pushed away. And this is the risk of an everyday human life that we all face. The contemplation of Advent is the meditation on that an unseeing God, holy mystery that we call God, became visible, allowed itself to become seen and touched. If you were to write this story, or if you were in charge of all things, you would think that the divine would make themselves into something that was all-encompassing, beautiful and perfect, would be received, could never be harmed. It would be the greatest thing ever. But in fact, there's a big biblical note to that. In fact, I think it's up on the screen. There's a verse that was a precursor to say, this person's not even gonna be attractive, right? You know, like they're setting it up low expectations. And if we look at the life of Jesus through the scriptures, we'll see that Jesus experienced a life full of the risk of being loved. He had friends. He was in a complicated family situation. Like, some of his family didn't even really believe in his vocation and questioned it always. The religious leaders in his community thought he was the spawn of Satan. Even one of his best friends sold him out because he's like, this job sucks and this isn't going anywhere, right? He was not a person who was beyond being touched, the risk of being loved. And yet we see in his journey that he had this kind of spring, this place inside that was emanating, pouring out of love. In fact, one time he's sitting at a well with a woman, and he says about this spring, he mentions some eternal spring, and she's like, what is this? And he goes, I have this spring inside of me, this everlasting spring that can come out of you, and I offer that to you. I offer that to you too. I think when we look at this image, and we see this tree rooted in this deep well, what Jesus is offering is something that he experienced himself, right? He accepted his incarnation. He accepted the risk of being loved, and from that was able to receive and pour out that love into others. And he offers that same thing to us. We can see, I know this is we're using art and imagery, and how do we practice that? How do we get in touch with that wellspring of love? And I have a practice that I do that I just want to take a few minutes to share to you that you could do in your own time. Because I know these can be very abstract ideas and talking about love and the wellspring inside of us. There's no well inside of us, right? But except for blood. But if you opened it up, that's what would come out. But here's a couple practices that I do that help me get in touch with this thing that's there. So if you can, find your heartbeat. If you can, find your heartbeat. Find it on the inside of on the inside of your rib cage. You can even do it on your hand. You can do it in your neck. And if you can't find a heartbeat, maybe you're a zombie. But find your heartbeat. So you have this organ, this beat, this thing that's going on inside of you that allows you to be here. All of us are here right now because of our heartbeat. And our heartbeat is nothing that we're in charge of. It happens unconsciously. We can't decide to stop it. It just keeps going. All of us are here now because of something we're not in charge of. And where did you get your heart? Where did you get your heartbeat? Did you have to go to a store or a shrine or a sanctuary to pick it up? No, it's just always been with you. It was given to you. You never had to ask for it. And when another word for something that's given to us without asking for it is called a grace. You have a grace inside of you right now. You're here we're all here only because of a grace. And we can take that past our heartbeat into our breath. And we can control our breathing and stuff like that, but it also runs on its own sometimes when we're not even paying attention to it. And we have another version of a grace that's inside of us. And we could even take it to a larger level, like we're on a planet orbiting a star that's at this perfect kind of percentage where life can grow. Like we are on a planet spinning around a star that allows life to happen. We're only here because of something that we're not in charge of. Again, another grace. There's so many graces in the physical world we live in that are helping us be here right now. So we have this like physical grace, but then we also have, I think, this like spiritual grace. Now I want you to do something, and I don't want you, this is a rhetorical question, or don't say it out loud. But what I would like you to do is I'd like you to just say hi to God. Say like a prayer, not with like words, but like with your soul, with you, where you can just be quiet and you can communicate. Just take like 2 seconds to do that right now. You can say, what's up, hi, hola, whatever you want to say. In all of us is some kind of doorway, portal. I like to call it a telephone. In us, we have this like soul telephone to the divine. In some ways, we can communicate to the thing that's unseen that we call God. And how are we able to do that? Who gave us that telephone? Did you have to go to a store or a shrine or a sanctuary to get it? Did somebody come along and place it inside of you? No, it's always been there. You have something inside of you that's always been there that allows you to talk to the divine. Again, we could call that a grace. So we have this like physical grace and we have this like soul grace inside of us. And I believe that these, when we spend time with those simple practices, they lead us to this well of love that Jesus is talking about. And because when we spend time taking phone calls and we spend time paying attention to our lives and being here, we're going to allow ourselves to be seen, the whole spectrum of us. And that is where love wants to meet us. The next image is of this woman, and the verse is, let it be to me according to your word. There was a moment when the presence of God felt like morning sickness. And maybe the unease that you feel in your life right now could be that same avenue of presence. Morning sickness, for those of you who have had it or don't know, is the body's function of preparing for life to come through this other person. And my wife described it as like going to a party, or it's like getting hungover without going to the party, or feeling nauseous without ever getting to enjoy the roller coaster ride. It's not in every pregnancy, but it's in most, and it's very awful. It's like the first trimester, it just like wipes moms out. And like it doesn't mention in the holy text that Mary had morning sickness, but being a human being, most likely she did. And I think what's interesting about Mary having morning sickness is that all of a sudden the announcement of God with us came from like abstract ideas to participation. Like the euphoria of being like, an angel came to me and told me this, you know? It moved from, oh, this is so great, then to actually having to participate in that announcement. Because every divine announcement means that you're going to grow, that some kind of growth is happening. And growth is always uneasy, because growth is never easy. Growth is the like expanding and stretching of making more of a capacity to push on ahead of what you thought that you could. And like this is often the case in any kind of growth. Like any kind of growth is going to potentially leave you dry heaving on the sidelines. Like if you've ever trained for like a marathon or some kind of multi-sport thing, you know that there's a moment when you're running and you push yourself so far that you feel like you're going to throw up. Or for those of us, like if you've ever felt the anxiety, the nauseous anxiety of packing up all your earthly belongings, putting them in a truck, and moving to a city you've never been to. Or the queasy feeling of starting to date again, right? Or the little like knot in your throat about like starting that business you've wanted to do for so long and taking the steps for that. I've like been growing as a public speaker for years, but still every speech is predicated on a little bit of vomit in my mouth as I prepare to speak. It's not a sign that you're doing it wrong. It's actually evidence that you're on the right path. That uneasy feeling, like on actually growing and being asked to grow and feeling that unease is the same thing that happened to every single person in the Bible as well. Look at the Christmas story. We see this like chorus of people who found themselves in uneasy situations. And we celebrate their story now because we can see on the other side of their lives like how it all worked out. Some good, some tough, things like that. Why it's hard to sing a good song is because we're actually in the midst of the uneasiness right now. The growth that God is doing to us right now, it can feel uneasy. And there are times in that uneasiness of letting God grow you, because what is hard about letting God grow you is that you're being asked to trust in the outcome that's not quite clear to you. There are a lot of things that we want to grow in. I want to grow in my reps, I want to grow in my steps. I want to grow. And we have some kind of perceived future or outcome that we're going to get into that growth. But when you whisper to the cosmos all by yourself and you go, I want my life to be meaningful. Would you do something with my life? I don't know where you want me to go, but I'll go wherever you wanted to go. Let it be unto me as you have willed it. You have no idea what kind of cosmic strategies will start to get put in place in order to answer that request. And it may lead you to uneasy situations. Uneasy situations. Uneasy situations to where sometimes you might even say, Are you even seeing my life? Or do you even care about what's going on with me? Are you even a part of all of this? And we say that because there's a lot of things going on in the world, and often we're just checking in to make sure God, as well as paying attention to wars and famines and tsunamis, does God see us too? But also it's a prayer. It's like a vehicle. We're also saying, I don't know if this is what I signed up for because I didn't think that I would be led to hear. If you were to ask a mother hugging the toilet after just throwing up, why are you doing this? Why is it worth doing this? She would take a piece of tissue paper and wipe the vomit off her chin, and she'd go, for love. I'm doing it because I love this child. And I think when we ask God about our uneasy situation, the answer is very similar. It's for love. It's for love that you have been brought from what is comfortable to uncomfortable. It is for love that you have been moved from what is known to what is unknown. It is for love that you have been brought from a comfortable perch to a whole new perspective that makes you have to see everything differently. It's for love that you've been broken open to make a bigger capacity for love and faith and hope in the world. It's for love. It's because you're loved, and love wants to grow you. And then there's this next image, which is kind of like, how do we get in touch with maybe the process of what we're being grown into? This is a series of images on I am the one who is, who was, and who is to come, and this is the who was. I'll finish with this story. A few years ago, I found myself, I had been laid off from my job at a design company. I was kind of doing some, side work as an artist and stuff, but really poor. We were on food stamps for a while. Things were hard. My wife's business wasn't making any money at the time. We had 2 kids at the time, and it was a really tense time, financially, just like we just didn't know how to make it every month. And then I used to work, it's a long story to get into, but I'll summarize this. I used to work at a church for a long time. I got really burned out. I left kind of fast, and it was fine, but that pastor came back to me years later and was like, hey, I heard you got laid off. I wonder if there's a spot for you still on staff. Like, we'd love to talk about bringing you back. And I was like, that's the dumbest idea I've ever heard. I was like, what? And I had some friends alongside me who said, you don't know if that's 100% something you should say yes to or 100% you should say no to. So I went through this time of discernment. And then all of a sudden, I'm like flying down to Texas. At the time, I lived in Portland. I was flying, and this church was in Texas. So I moved from Portland to Texas, back to Portland, and now years later, I was being asked to move back to Texas. That is insane. But we went down there and we had some really hard conversations, and I had to receive some critique and I had to give some critique, and we started making amends to the hard things that had happened between us. And then it seemed like it was going to happen. And it wasn't my favorite choice, but I was like, gosh, I need a job. And I remember coming back and I was like, I can't believe this is happening. I can't believe we're gonna move back to Texas. And then I didn't hear anything from them for like a week. And about a week and a half later, I contacted the guy who was in charge of staffing. And he's like, oh yeah, we decided to pass. Sorry, we hadn't called you yet. And like, I don't know, I'm guessing a lot of you had this moment. When it was very humbling to be a grown-ass man and to not know what to do. Like, I don't know if you've ever been to that place. Like, all my strategies, all my plans, all the things, I was like, I can muster up this, it all was gone. And I found myself like in charge of a family or being a part of a family, having to take care of kids, and I did not know what to do. And it was one of the lowest moments of my life. Like, I just remember like crying all night and I just didn't know what to do. A few days later, I got a little side job. A friend of mine who's like a YouTuber was like, could you help me with a video, build this thing? I was like, great. So I'm at Home Depot getting some supplies. And I run into this guy, Cameron, who I had known from some other creative work in Portland. Cameron is, he's tall, he's got long hair, a big beard, he's a carpenter, and he leads a home church. He's sneakily messianic, right? And right? It's like, are you Jesus? Yeah. Great beard. And he made a bunch of furniture in this like brand agency I was at. He's a great guy. And I was like, we were talking, and he said, how was your week? And I was like, honestly, I've had one of like the worst weeks of my life. And I told him a bit about the story. And then Cameron was like, I feel like God wants to say something to you. And look, I'm into all the freakiness of life. I really am. But when people are like, I have a message from God, I'm like, maybe it's your projection. You know what I'm saying? But sure. And Cameron, in the nuts and bolts aisle at Home Depot, he's like, he goes, I feel what God is saying is that he sees where you're at and knows it's really painful. And he also wants you to know that the work that you did to forgive that broken relationship with that community was obedience, even if you're not going to go back there and work there. And I just started to cry in the nuts and bolts aisle at Home Depot, because it was like the thing behind the thing that I needed to hear. I was being seen in that moment. There's this, can you bring up that picture again? There's this part in the Gospels where John, the cousin of Jesus, the forerunner of Jesus, sees Jesus walking and he goes, look, There's the Lamb of God who's going to take away the sins of the world, which is a weird statement to say about your relative, right? And I don't think it's because Jesus is kind of sheepish at like family gatherings. You know what? In this Jewish narrative, there was this idea of this lamb, this scapegoat, this one who was going to be the atonement for the people, right? And it was working its way through all these different versions, from sacrifice to temple, this whole ritualistic thing. And what John was stating is going, what we're seeing now, that's the lamb. The lamb has moved to a lamb. A man. The lamb has moved from a man. The cosmic, the abstract idea has moved to something very personal, from interstellar to interpersonal. You know what I'm saying? It's like this big idea is actually happening in our midst. And this lamb in the book of Revelation says this to the churches, says, I am the Alpha and Omega, and the beginning and the end, says the Lord God. I am the one who is, who always was, and who is still to come, which I think answers the deep question we really have this Christmas, which is, who cares? Who cares? Like, who cares about our lives? Is there anyone who cares? I don't think our question really during Christmas time is like, what are the big theological ideas that impact our celebration of this season in this country? And how would we decorate our stars? No, I think our deepest question is like, does anybody see what's going on in our lives right now? Who cares? So I kind of like gathered myself together, and I said, thanks for that word, Cameron. I really appreciated it. And then I said, well, what are you here for? Nothing, he said to me. I was like, what do you mean? He goes, I was just driving by, and I sensed the Spirit tell me I should come in here and just wait. And I've just been like standing here waiting for 20 minutes. He's like, my wife's in the car. I'm just like standing here. Hold on, honey. I got to go stand in Home Depot. Something's happening. So he walked out with me and paid for my stuff. I walked to his car. I was like, hi, Mrs. Messianic Sneakiness. And then I drove home. And on my drive home, I was thinking about what just happened to me, this little, I don't know, miracle in aisle 34 or something. And it was interesting to me in my narrative about what I needed, that I was like, God, do you care about my life? Do you care about what's going on? What I need is like a plan, right? And the message that was given to me was not, here's the plan. The message was, I see your life. I know what's going on with you. And when I took that and I sat with that for a few days, I sat with that, and what emerged from that is a question that I'd like to leave you with today that you could ask about. How do I experience love? How is love meeting me in who I really am? How is love growing me in a way that I don't quite know, and I might find myself in a very uneasy season? But who cares about me? Does love care about me? And here's a question that came up that I come back to all the time. It's the last slide, if you could put it. What is the conversation I can only have by being here? What is the only conversation I can have by being here? Because often when things are taken away or we're brought into uneasy situations, a deeper conversation comes up. And as I sat with that question, the question of where I found myself, it came up out of the silence, and the question was, am I still called to be an artist? Am I still called to be an artist? Not as like a person, but like as a vocation, because I had stopped doing full-time artist income, which was nothing, for a while, and I had worked at like a couple companies and things like that, and then I found myself in this kind of unemployed, self-employed, and I was like, am I still called to be an artist, and what does that mean? And as I sat with that, the answer was yes. And as I started to step into that question and started to step into that vocation, it led me to start making the work that I deeply cared about. I had to come to some terms where I was just like, I hate the, obscurity often gets you to a place where you just have to go, what is it you want to do? And I was like, I want to talk about God, but I hate how people talk about God. It makes no sense to me. So I want to talk about it in a way that makes sense. The artwork is shit. And I was like, so I'd like to make some stuff for that. And then I wanted to make like weird liturgies, which is a whole other thing. Why are certain segments of sacred stuff about certain things of our lives, and then we leave out all these other things? And so that was kind of what I started to do. And I started to apply that, which inevitably led me to be here, to having written this book, to making this artwork. It was the place where love met me and changed me and grew me and was leading me somewhere. What is the only conversation you can have by being here? Because God is moving from cosmic ideas to the minutia of your life, That's where we find love working in our midst. I don't have a big ending. Hit the pyrotechnics. Great. Do you discuss the question? Let's solve all these questions. Great. Those same groups, you know what to do. There you go.